All right, so if you don't think it's World War III, let me tell you what time it is. Take a look at this spectacle right here, and just remember that World War I and World War II were not colloquially referred to as such until after the fact. The media came along and designated them as such after the fact. When they were fighting the wars, people weren't like, hey, this is World War II, guy in the trenches in World War I. They didn't know. They just knew that they were fighting against the Germans or the French or whatever side you were on. The same is the case right now, but it's not going to be officially referred to as a world war. Not that that matters, it's just semantics, until we cross the nuclear Rubicon. That's when the media is going to whip us all into a frenzy, but not a moment before. They got all the moving parts in place for the war economy and the ration books and the whole 9 yards, the military draft. Oh yes, it's coming. Take a look at this spectacle. I've never seen anything like this in this part of the world on this scale. The Egyptians are throwing several divisions of troops and heavy-hitting military equipment near the Israeli border. Egypt historically was an adversary of Israel. For the most part, for the time being, they have a fairly amicable relationship, except for the fact that the Israelis are inadvertently shelling their soldiers along the Rafah border to the tune of 9 injured so far. Now, hopefully, they remain in America's and Israel's good books, because the last thing Israel needs right now is a 3, possibly a 4-front war. Now, we do have fairly good ties with the Egyptians, but understand that a lot of these countries can flip, okay, with the exception of NATO. I mean, anybody who's in NATO is probably with us till the bitter end, with the exception of Turkey. Countries like Turkey, Egypt, these countries can go either way, and they're going to see who is winning, who has a better chance of being the victor and being the next Pax, whatever it's going to be, Pax China, Pax Russia, Russo Empire, whatever the hell it's going to be in the future. They're just looking to see, okay, who's going to rule the roost. Egypt gets a lot of their food from abroad. They're a net importer of food. They need food. If Egypt doesn't have enough food, or the price of food is too high, you get a Mubarak situation that you had over 10 years ago. You get riots, you get revolution, and it gets very ugly. And that is why they're going to side with whoever can bring them the resources that they need to support their rapidly growing population that unfortunately cannot be sustained on the Nile River alone. Take a look at this spectacle. I mean, I've never seen anything like this. Asides maybe what you see in China and North Korea at the military parades. And if you guys can't see it, but my screen is actually another foot bigger in that direction. And this just goes on forever. Just endless amounts of M1A1 Abrams tanks that I think they actually used to manufacture them in Egypt, but do not quote me on that. Now, why am I showing you this? Well, because it is just one other data point that points towards global conflict, okay? Now, we got a ton of information to talk about. Yes, there's active shooter stuff going on. We had a guy that was spotted by the RCMP with a firearm in and around a nuclear facility in Manitoba. I never even knew they had a nuclear facility. I guess they have fissionable materials there. Are we going to see dirty bombs? You know, personal security and situational awareness at this point in time is something everybody should be practicing. As I've said, since that supposed day of rage kicked off, and that was just the beginning of it, we're going to see more extremist events from radicals. This is why there's the travel advisories in place, and I would not be surprised if they in some way, shape, or form pin this on a guy and they put a Quran in his hand or something and say, see, it's an extremist. And I would not be surprised if we seen a lull in far-right extremist active shooter situations and they suddenly all became Palestinian supporters. You know, you just never know at this point in time. Whatever is politically useful for the global hegemons. Right now, we're also seeing foiled plans of truck attacks around the world. Just, I mean, the list goes on. Sleeper cells coming over the border. This conflagration is about to explode across the world, and that is likely an understatement. Today, we have the Russians deciding that, well, if NATO is going to do its steadfast noon nuclear exercise, we're going to see your nuclear exercise, and we're going to raise you one retaliatory practice nuclear strike. Get a load of this. Imagine you're Russian in the current state of affairs and you didn't get the memo and you see an intercontinental ballistic missile blazing overhead in the wee hours of the morning. You don't know if this is real world or exercise. I'm quite certain that most people did because it was heavily broadcast on the media. This one was overseen by Vladimir Putin, and I know some normalcy bias stricken individual is going to come on the channel and they're going to say, well, this was all planned in advance and you know, this is an annual exercise that they do. But clearly the publicity of this is sending a message. It is Russia flaunting their nuclear deterrence. And the reason why the Russians and NATO do these exercises at the same time, the reason why if NATO does an exercise, Russia always does an exercise typically at the same time, is because you don't know if it's an exercise. And that's the problem. It could be masquerading as an exercise, but I go back to my saying, there are no military exercises, only World War III disguises. In the current environment, let me say that again, there are no military exercises. We must always interpret something as a World War III disguises, all right? So that's what the Russians likely were doing and sending a message, and they time these things, they try to coordinate them. Yes, there's back channel communications to ensure that things don't spiral out of control, but when you have both superpowers in the world and China doing God knows what at the same time, running these simulations, these live fire exercises using nuclear weapons, nuclear capable weapons, deployment systems anyways, things can go wrong, all right? Now, they were not only just launching ICBMs from their YARs, they were also launching numerous other ICBMs, one from a Tula submarine in the Barents Sea, also launching missiles from Tu-95 Bear bomber aircraft, all right? And all of this happened on the same day. And remember now, this is all overseen by Vladimir Putin himself and Sergei Shoigu, the highest chain of command, as you would likely expect it to be. This on the heels of Putin walking with the nuclear briefcase, the full-scale nuclear exercise they just conducted a couple weeks ago. Well, we did that emergency test. Man, October has been a busy month for nuclear saber rattling. But this is absolutely off the charts. I mean, there is just so much crap going on. And now today, Zelensky, trying to remain relevant in the minds of the West, comes out and says Russia targeted a nuclear power plant. Now, remember, we've been saying this for some time, that the way they're going to get back in the news is either by targeting a nuclear power plant or something which is going to bring eyes back in that direction. But they're not going to do that until they get the cue from Washington. Until Washington wants them to take attention away from the Middle East and all of these attacks on American military bases just become commonplace and get drowned out by all the other white noise of stuff. When we get normalized and acclimated to that, they're going to shift attention back to Ukraine because that's where the big money is, okay? And they're probably going to do that by, you know, amplifying some story which will be maybe taken out of proportion, or it might be real because we don't know how far they're really pushing the Russians with the ATACMS missiles right now and the route that we're seeing with the Russian Navy in the Black Sea. It could be serious for all we know. Okay, so it could be much more serious than we realize, and that is why we're seeing all of the DEFCON 3, possibly even 2 in some cases, on some days, activity in the air. But Zelensky comes out and he says, hey, you guys targeted one of our nuclear facilities. And apparently this was the explosion that looked like a frickin' nuclear explosion. And I gotta say, some of these explosions, I know this wasn't a nuclear explosion, but would we ever really know if they used low yield tactical nukes? Especially, yes, they have radiation detection devices, but do they have that everywhere? You know, would the seismic be able to really pick it up? If we're talking about mini Davy Crockett style tactical nukes, do you think that they could use something like that and it go unnoticed? Especially when you're going to have fighting everywhere at this point in time, and that is a massive FOAB level explosion. Anyways, they're saying, let me get back to the point, that there was an explosion at a Ukrainian nuclear site. They claim, Zelensky claims, as a result of the explosion, windows in the building were broken. Okay, now we know that you need a very direct hit on one of these nuclear reactors with probably something like a bunker busting bomb, like in order for you to do serious damage that would actually create a problem. Nonetheless, it makes news headlines, right? So due to the damage of the power lines, 1,800 houses in the Khmelnytsky region were cut off power. Restoration work will begin as soon as power engineers are allowed back into the site. Okay, massive explosions near this nuclear facility. So Ukraine is going to slowly make its way back in the news. Now that you got the new Speaker of the House or whatever his name is, I can't remember what his name is. Apparently, a lot of people are confident on the Ukrainian side that they're going to get their $104 billion paycheck. Not everybody is as convinced, I should say, but many people do think that this guy who originally supported the Ukraine war, but in recent months has started to wane in his support, will be all for it. The Russians have now officially revoked the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, so it's on, man. It's on. This is a brave new world. Understand that we're just a stone's throw away from a full-blown war economy, war rations, universal basic income, the whole 9 yards, automation. It's all going to happen in and around the same time. And then you're going to have the AI explosion on top of it all, which is why the US government today decided that they're no longer going to allow NVIDIA to supply chips to the Chinese. Don't know how that's going to work because most of them are made in Taiwan and China, and apparently this wasn't supposed to be implemented for 30 days from October 17th, and I'll talk a bit more about this in depth, but it's a point worth mentioning that they now say that this is immediate, okay? So there's an immediacy to this. We immediately want you to stop sending these chips to the Chinese, whatever sort of nanoscale chips they have. So you know the AI race is absolutely going to factor into this World War III calculus as well. I tell you, man, things are out of control. Now get a load of this, all right? Get a load of this. I mean, I called it. I hate to say it, but I called it. I guess when you just do this 24/7, you're going to call a lot of stuff. Dimona, the Israeli hub for their nuclear research and facilities, which is not to say that this is where they store their nuclear weapons. Likely not. Out of sight, out of mind. Who knows where they store them, what deep underground military bunker. But clearly, somebody who's associated with the mullahs is sending Israel a message in taking these pictures. They're saying that they have sleeper cells throughout Israel, and they took a picture of the Dimona sign, clearly, and I think there was another picture taken. This one here, Shalomi Rosh, I cannot pronounce that, but that one is with Soleimani, okay, a picture of Soleimani, clearly signaling that there's sleeper cells amongst the Israeli population who will become activated and possibly sabotage some of these facilities, which I would presume are heavily guarded. But if the lapse in security that we've seen on October 7th is any indication of how well prepared Israel is going to be with all the things going on, with wars breaking out in pretty much every border. You got the West Bank flaring up. They're sending in convoys of military vehicles into there yesterday. You got Hezbollah heating up. We don't even know what's going on there. I can tell you that with the Hezbollah situation, Hezbollah came out with a statement today, and they basically said this: Hezbollah operates at all military and political levels, and this battle with Israel is their battle, and we have one goal and one destiny. Wait, according to Al-Arori, who is the Hamas deputy head of Hamas Politburo, Salih Al-Arori. You're going to hear a lot of these names that you're not going to be able to pronounce in the coming months ahead. He says that, wait, the fighting hasn't even started yet, which is very indicative of a high state of tension, considering there's already 42 confirmed by Hezbollah kills on their side in those northern border clashes, which is very significant. The Israelis are not disclosing a lot of their casualties along that front, and they're starting to do this stuff like Ukraine did for the last 18 months, you know, only referring to their wins and downplaying their losses, just like a gambler. typically does, right? They overstate their victories and they understate their losses. That is the art of war. When you see Israel only talking about the losses that the other guy has, that's when you know something might not be right. That's when you know they might be losing a lot more than they want to let on. And historically, when Israel goes to war with Hezbollah, yes, there still is that technological edge that Israel has over, historically a very large technological edge, but the amount of casualties on both sides is far more proportionate than what we're seeing in the bombardment of civilians versus, you know, Israeli civilians dying in the attacks on October 7th. So Netanyahu has basically stated that, and this guy's on thin ice right now, thin ice. He is nobody's friend right now. Anyways, he's telling us that the start date and time for the ground invasion has been set. And as we said yesterday, it's a matter of getting all the missile defense in place before they go and do it. Now, that assumes, just think about that for a second, that assumes that they think that right when the Israelis embark on this Gaza invasion, that apparently they're going to be using nerve agents in the tunnels. That just came out today as well. I'll talk about that in a minute. They're saying that right when this happens, they're going to receive hellfire from either the rest of the Middle East. But is that really what is going on? Because I don't buy that a lot of these Arab countries who claim they identify with the plight of the Palestinians, and while their populations, the civilians within those countries, may share that sympathy for the plight of the Gazan people and the atrocities currently being committed and the attrition that's currently being waged on that whatever you want to call it, that enclave of open air prison, whatever you want to call it. While there might be that sympathy, these guys, these heavy hitters at those high levels, whether it's MBS, you know, the Saudi royals or the Ayatollahs or the, you know, I don't genuinely think that they're willing to sacrifice everything for this little old 2 million population, regardless of how they're trying to leverage it politically. So what does that mean then? That means that the United States is planning to go to war, a much bigger war, and that they're just trying to get their forces in there first. They got to get their missile defense in before they can bring their offense in. The problem is, as we talked about yesterday, they can be easily overwhelmed by Iranian missiles. Iran has been planning for this one very thing, just like those Palestinians who had nothing better to do but kick rocks for the last few years, who've been plotting this attack on October 7th. Well, that's what Iran has been doing. They've just been digging bunkers and building missiles, digging bunkers, building missiles, which is not to say that there isn't a very pronounced secular component of Iranian society. If you look at Tehran, a lot of it is very secular. There's many places that you would, you know, be hard-pressed to notice the difference between an American city and Tehran. I've been watching a lot of videos just about Tehran lately, and it, you know, it looks like a Western city in a lot of respects. Not all. There's still some people who wear the hijab, but for the most part, very similar. But this is the one thing they've been prepared. When you're the most sanctioned nation on the planet next to Russia, you don't really have a whole lot to, you know, to do except prepare for the inevitable war that awaits. Now, the United States pulled their forces out of Afghanistan. They knew that the war with Ukraine was coming. They knew it. They obviously knew it. Now, you know, the Iranians, the writing's on the wall once again, and they're concerned that there's shit's going to flare up in Iraq, as it is, in Syria, as it is. Attacks throughout Syria on American bases today, as well as in Iraq. I think I have some video footage of that. And then we got Erdogan rocking the mic today. Oh, we got some stuff to share with you guys today. This is just a little sidebar here. This is a bunch of trucks that are en route to Jordan, Iraqi trucks full of oil that are staging some kind of protest. They're not going into the country as a result of what's going on with Palestine. So you're seeing their own kind of truckers' protests of sorts take shape there. Now, this was at an American base in Abu Hajar. An Iraqi Islamic resistance organization attacked an American military base. So the shit's hitting the fan. Like I said, I could tell by Lloyd Austin's body language in the recent interview he gave with NBC News when he was saying that there is a very, 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 very high likelihood that attacks on American military bases ramp up, and he wasn't kidding. This is just going to kick the hornet's nest. You know, regardless of whether or not the upper echelons actually care about the grievances of the Palestinian people, what matters is the religious fanatics who are going to use this as an excuse to get the 70 virgins or whatever. And if every time, and this is the problem with killing civilians, every time you kill a civilian, you basically potentially create another self-deletion bomber. Insert S word there, if you know what I'm saying. A person who's willing to throw themselves because they have nothing else to lose. When you take a man's family away, what do you expect he's going to do with the rest of his time? What happened in Vietnam? Every time you pulled one of those guys out, you created another 10. Okay, and that's exactly what's going to happen. That's all Israel's doing, is they're just making hundreds of thousands of self-deletion bombers. That's all they're doing. And that's why it's very short-sighted and myopic, and it leads me to believe that maybe, because they have to know this by now, that this doesn't work, maybe that's what they want. Okay, maybe that is what they want. Anyways, we are hearing this from a very credible source, but take it with a grain of salt. But I would not be surprised, because this may be the sensible way to do it. Israel might use nerve gas on the Hamas tunnels. This is according to, you can just go and look this up. It's a Middle Eastern perspective website. It's fairly legit. Okay, it's like Al Jazeera level legit, and I don't see any reason why we would doubt this. Source tells MEE reports of a delayed ground invasion is part of a misinformation campaign designed to obtain the element of surprise in a multi-pronged attack. Now, interestingly, because Netanyahu says that they have the start time and date set, according to Douglas McGregor, if any of you guys follow him, he's got a lot to say about the Ukraine war. According to Douglas McGregor, the American Special Forces attempted to do some sort of raid in which they got the hostages back, Delta Force, Chuck Norris style, but it failed miserably, according to him. So is this multi-pronged attack going to include U.S. Special Forces? They don't really have to tell anybody at this point, so long as they don't get caught, right? And they already said we're going to commit 2,000 support personnel. So at this point in time, they're going to be right in there like a dirty shirt. Now, they also claim that the U.S. Delta Force will oversee large quantities of nerve gas being pumped into Hamas tunnels capable of paralyzing the bodily movement for a period of time between 6 to 12 hours. So are we going to see Hamas in their CBRN gear? They must have prepared for this contingency. They must prepare. I mean, when all you have to do to think about this all day, they must have CBRN gear. I think with this nerve agent, it can also affect the skin. The problem is, and they're not thinking this one through enough, if they do utilize those techniques, then you got a hostage situation where you might potentially be gassing the hostages. So, you know, we might potentially see a blunder, but we're never going to know. I mean, they control the narrative at this point. They're attacking, you know, journalists openly with impunity. So we're never going to know. The fog of war is incredibly thick, far thicker, I would even say, than what is going on in Ukraine, because they control the internet. They control the narrative for the most part, in spite of the fact that you're seeing massive pushback on a scale never before seen, and the war has barely even started yet. But the reason why Netanyahu has to telegraph that, yes, we are going to do the ground offensive, is to keep that element of surprise, keep that ambiguity, keep the pressure on, and keep his people happy who want the hostages released. There are people there in Israel, probably hundreds if not thousands, who are loosely related or directly related to the hostages, who are calling for him to go in there and do something. But like the Uvalde police, they're just waiting till the right time, right? And then I made a an interesting post about that on another platform recently, but it really reminds me of that situation. And people will say, well, it's just not the right time, and you know, you got to be very meticulous about this, and a lot of it comes down to cowardice at the end of the day. I mean, you know, we'll just indiscriminately bomb buildings hoping that the hostages aren't in those buildings, but we won't go in there like men and try to get the job done. When you sign up for that job, you don't sign up for that job, you know, without knowing that someday, you know, you could get clipped. I'm saying that you don't want that to happen, but that's par for the course. Buy the ticket, take the ride. If you get the call to go in, obviously they're very casualty averse. And I don't know, if I was in that line of work, I would expect that there's a good chance that I ain't coming back. Okay, and that's just a fact of life. I might be in that situation at some point, the way the world is going. You know, we might be looking at conscription at some point here. I'm probably over the ideal age to be brainwashed into something like that. I'm pretty sure they're going to look at my resume and they're going to be like, yeah, this guy's not worth the squeeze. But you never know. You never know. Did I mention that Hezbollah has indicated that the war and the fighting hasn't even started yet, but they are fully committed towards this military endeavor at all military and political levels, and that the battle with Israel is their battle? Boy, is shit going to get wild. Now, according to some guy somewhere, according to, who said this? This was the Wall Street Journal. According to some guy somewhere, Hamas trained by Iran. They claim to have evidence that 500 Hamas terrorists received specialized combat training in Iran by the IRGC, which would be, okay, that kind of makes sense, but it kind of doesn't. Hamas are Sunnis. Iran are Shiites. They don't like each other. They view each other as apostates. Now, might they find this common enemy? Possibly. Is there more homogeneity amongst Muslim people than we've been led to believe? Is it the United States who's in there trying to stoke the war between the Sunnis and the Shiites? Their version of Catholic and Protestant, if you will. Is that what's really going on? And are the Iranians and the Saudis really trying to make amends and really trying to unify? It's hard to say. But, you know, when you're MBS and you're sitting on all that oil and you see a competitor right next to you who has a large amount of oil themselves and they got a very large military and you are historical adversaries, then you might not want Iran to get too big. And so you might go with the United States, which they apparently are, because they're now deploying missile defense systems all throughout the country, which you only deploy if you're going to be using them against ICBMs. Okay, you're only deploying THAAD systems to be used against missiles that are traveling very fast at a very high altitude over very long distances. It's not really like the Patriot missile defense system, okay? So this means that they're preparing for Iran to start some shit with Israel. The question is, why would that happen now? I think everybody's just on edge. Everybody knows that somebody's going to make a move. Eventually, the war with Iran has to start between Israel and Iran for some dumb reason, because Iran is the last holdout. They don't want to trade in US dollars, you know, and do that whole petrodollar bullshit. The Saudis apparently still are, in spite of all the BRICS rhetoric being flown around. And this really, and that's something people need to keep in mind as well, the Saudis, how they factor in with the petrodollar here. Okay, now allowing the United States to leverage them to be the US's bitch once again, put their missiles and their military equipment. This is just the tip of the spear, possibly. And you got to think that's what they're thinking. Anyways, we got attacks on US military bases. We got the THAAD stuff that I just talked about, the information with respect to the use of ballistic missiles. Let's get some other sludge content on for you here. What else do we got to show? Okay, so we got the run-of-the-mill, you know, guy at train crossing who records U.S. tanks moving across the country. Is it something, or is it a big nothing burger? It doesn't matter at this point. We know that we're going to war. So whether it's going for an exercise, whether they're going to repair, whether they're going to Ukraine, who knows? But they're going somewhere. And anytime you see that, it probably ain't a sign that peace is on the horizon. The U.S. staged some live-fire military exercises across the Middle East in response to all the shit that's been going on. Of course, that could have been misinterpreted by the other side as being offensive. So you just never know how that factors in. Apparently, al-Mahadin, Iraqi militias, have threatened direct strikes on Kuwait. Kuwait being a portal into the Middle East for the Americans. So are we going to see a rerun of Operation Desert Storm once again? I mean, history just rhymes, doesn't it? Isn't that crazy? Iran is increasing its response to the increased number of U.S. troops and military equipment in the Eastern Mediterranean. Do we want to watch that guy? Why not? We'll talk about him in just a minute. But Iran increasing their state of readiness. Missile units and drone bases on the coast of the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman have been put on increased combat readiness. They are getting ready for war. If the U.S. attacks, Iran will literally blow up every single military base in the Middle East in retaliation. They're equipped with very serious and highly sophisticated missiles with great targeting. This is according to Russian military analysts. And just remember, after they took out Soleimani, Iran did respond with a pinpoint precision strike on a U.S. military base. A lot of people forget about that. No Americans died because they notified Trump that they were going to do it beforehand because they didn't want it to escalate, but they had to do something so that they didn't appear overly weak to their people. So they targeted that building, and you could not have placed that missile with any greater amount of precision than they did. So you should not, absolutely should not underestimate the capabilities of the Iranians. This is not going to be a cakewalk like Iraq. For one, the region is mountainous. Even to traverse over the mountains without getting shot down by their fairly sophisticated air defense systems, it takes a very large fuel tank, okay, from wherever the United States are able to target it from. So, and now you also have this situation, which was rather interesting to see. You have the Turkish president addressing in Ankara, addressing his assembly and stating that he has canceled his plans to visit Israel, and the tears that the West is shedding for Israel are manifestation of a fraud. Turkey is ready to become a guarantor for the state of Palestine, and Israel and the U.S. will lose its global standoff because they stand against justice. You know, and this guy just the day before, okay, approved Sweden's accession into NATO. What the hell is going on? What a tangled web we weave, isn't it? And this is why I'm saying these sides can flip. I mean, these people, when you look at their faces, they're just kind of looking like, okay, well, what are you saying here? Like, they don't seem to be too worried. They kind of seem to know this is bluster, perhaps, that he's just doing this to appease the Muslim population and he doesn't, you know, he's talking out it with a forked tongue. That might be the case, just looking at those people's reactions. And that's what you sometimes have to do when these politicians give these kind of speeches in front of their assemblies, is watch the reactions. Because if they look really scared, then you know shit's about to hit the fan. If they're like this and they're looking like, okay, this guy's just talking out his ass to placate the 99% of the population that are Muslims in his country, then maybe you don't have to worry so much. But Turkey can go either way. I mean, you know, whatever side of the fence they fall on, I guess, is what it's going to be. And just after that, he said that the market tanked like 10%. It went from maybe not quite 10%. Does that be 10%? Maybe a little less than that. So their market was at about 8,200 or so, or 80, 84, and then it went down to 76. Okay, so it was a fairly steep drop. Turkey, very volatile market as is. Hyperinflation out the yang-yang, earthquakes, all kinds of crises, but they do have the largest military in Europe, and that should not be understated. Pakistan also just did a nuclear test as well. And where did Pakistan get the technology? Successfully test-fired Ababil nuclear missile with multiple re-entry vehicles. So they tested a nuclear warhead that is not only just an ICBM, but it also has numerous warheads on it. Okay, and this is why you got nuke sniffer planes running around there. China, Russia, Israel duked it out at the UN conference. China and Russia basically told Israel to go and stuff it, to keep the victimization rhetoric to yourself, because we simply do not give a you-know-what. And yeah, China just said, hey, we're not going to enter into an argument with you about this Karening that you're doing right now. Yes, we know it was a tragedy. We've denounced the terrorist attacks every single frickin' day, every single frickin' minute. But some people seem to think that you can't advocate for basic humanitarian international law, the one that we're all supposed to democratically uphold and represent, that you can't do that at the same time. You can't walk and chew gum. You can't, look at the situation in the Gaza Strip, see that it's an obvious humanitarian crisis, that there's a huge disproportionate amount of civilians dying, and that there needs to be more discretion and restraint shown, and not this rhetoric about how we're the most, we're the nicest army ever, and we try the best not to kill people, and blah, 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 bullshit. Anyways, no matter what you think about their strategy, all it's doing is creating more self-deletion bombers. That's all it's going to do. North Korea has been eerily silent on the U.S. deployment of an aircraft carrier and a strategic bomber with nuclear weapons in South Korea this month. Some observers say Pyongyang may be focusing on its planned launch of military reconnaissance satellite, and North Korea reacted sharply to these moves of this positioning of this military equipment, with its state-run news agency affirming the U.S. strategic assets that it's currently placed there are its first targets of destruction. What the hell are we doing? Are we just going for broke at this point? Are they just they're sending all the aircraft carriers out to sea as we speak? Are they just, and you know what, somebody was telling me the other day, they're like, why are all the aircraft carriers, and this was, I think, a couple months ago, and they're like, why are they all back home? And now it makes sense, because they were getting resupplied. They were getting ready for the long journey ahead. And so they know this stuff is coming long in advance. And they could just be going for broke. They just could be letting it all ride now, because they know China's getting ready to erupt. They know that the Middle East is ready to erupt, and that Ukraine is possibly on the brink of defeat, but it could go either way. So they're gonna, amplify some crazy story. It looks like I got 4%. I just want to let you guys know that we are about to hit a cold snap here, and U.S. national debt, look at that, 33, almost 34 trillion. We are about to hit a cold snap. We did get these cool new devices in. They're called HEAT HOGs. They're very similar but better than the Mr. Heater systems. They're just built way more robust, and they just have a better design. And you can get them in small for your car, medium, or large, and you mix that with your propane, and you got a good heating source. Yes, it's not going to be indefinite, but we're talking about short-term emergencies. Right now, you wouldn't know it, but it is very cold here, but it's deceptive, because right now the Arctic is 5 degrees above average temperature. Europe and Asia are way hotter than normal. The East Coast hotter than normal, but right here where I am, it's cold as hell. But that cold front is about to move down all the way into Texas. So we may well see another Texas snowmageddon incident. Stay prepped. Winter is coming. If there is ever going to be World War III, it's going to start in winter, my friends. Got to go because I'm out of time. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.